Today's gospel reading from the Gospel of Matthew ends with a famous saying of Jesus when Jesus says, "Whoever exalt themselves will be humbled, and whoever humble themselves will be exalted." And it gives us a chance here in the second week of Lent to think about the virtue of humility and the places where we might be called to conversion in relationship to humility. That's tricky, though, because in our tradition, in our experience, perhaps even, the language of humility, the language of becoming humble, has often been misunderstood, has often been, frankly, misused to keep people who are already humble humbler. So I want to talk a little bit about the difference between good humility and bad humility, and then ask us to think, how do you want to think about becoming more humble this Lent? So the word humility comes from the same word humus, from which we get the word dirt, earth. In Hebrew, we talk about ha-adam, Adam, the earth creature, the thing that's made out of dirt. It's easy to remember this in Lent. We were reminded at the very beginning of Lent, perhaps, when we received ashes on our forehead, remember that you are dust, and to dust you shall return. So the first part, the foundation of humility, this virtue, is about recognizing our relationship to God and our relationship perhaps to the rest of creation. How do we relate to the fact that we are not God, that God is God, that we are earth creatures, we are dirt, we are dust, and to dust we shall return? There's a freedom in that of recognizing that one is small. The historian Christopher Bolitto, and theologian on a recent book on humility, refers to humility as a positive sense of one's smallness. And as a way in which embracing that smallness, embracing the freedom and the joy, and perhaps some of the frustration of we are not God. We can't do everything. We shouldn't be trying to do everything. We instead have our ability to make a small contribution as a little piece of creation embedded and in relationship with a lot of the rest of creation. That also might help us thinking about the relationship of humility to our ecosystem, the relationship of humility to our physical environment, that we are made out of dirt. We are not above this world. We are not above nature and the world. We are part of that and have distinct responsibilities to that world. But we also can't forget that we may be, as the psalmist says, a little less than gods, but we are at the same time, we are fundamentally dust, and to dust we shall return in God's good pleasure. A second piece of humility, relating not just to God, is about how we relate to each other. And this is what I think Jesus is starting with today, is how do we exalt ourselves above everyone else? So humility is recognizing that we each of us, we have, as the text says, we have only one Father in heaven, and we are all siblings, that we are all somehow equal to each other. Now, there are times where you might have more authority, more expertise, more experience. Even in when your people are sort of sometimes at the lower end of the totem pole, we all have experiences of having a temptation to put ourselves above others. And a starting point for humility is to recognize that even if we have special skills or gifts, we are not better at existing than the people around us. We are not more loved by God. We are not more valued by God, or should not value each other based on appearances or even based upon skills and abilities. So one part of humility is the part that probably most of us grew up with, which is don't think you're better than anybody else. That don't get above yourself. Don't think that somehow you are more valuable or worthy or important than some other person, and treat each other appropriately. Now, the trickiness here and the danger of what I would call a bad understanding of humility is that for so many people who have already been put down below by our society for whole bunches of reasons, people in historically marginalized groups who have been humbled, or the related word, humiliated, because of their race, because of their gender, because of their sexual orientation or gender identity, because of their abilities or disabilities or their language. There's so many places in our world where people are told already that you are lower. And this language of become humble has been used to say, so stay in your place. Don't get above that place. Thomas Aquinas, drawing on Aristotle, always said that every virtue has both a mistake by going too far in one direction from it, and a mistake going from the other direction from it. And the virtue was in the middle. So if one direction of the virtue of humility where we can make a mistake is by becoming too high and valuing ourselves too highly, the other mistake would be to value ourselves too little. The other mistake of a bad theology of humility is to say we are not worth as much as the person next to us. We are not, our voice doesn't count as much as somebody else, that we don't have value in God's eyes or in humans' eyes, and to act accordingly. So, with that in mind, embracing being humble, embracing that positive sense of our smallness, is not only a call to not exalt yourselves above other people, but it can also be a call to not put yourself down below other people, but instead to embrace our shared siblinghood as children of God created in the image and likeness of God. I don't know which of those you need to hear today. I don't know which of those needs to be part of your Lenten conversion. But I do know that whatever you need to do in your life to become more humble, it takes time and practice. And that's why we have communities to do that. St. Benedict, in his rule for monastics, talks about he's creating a school for the Lord's service. And in some ways, we can think about our communities of faith as schools of humility. Marriage is a big one of those for many of us, where you learn to recognize the limitations of your gifts and the potential of your gifts. Our parish is one of those places. Our workplaces are often these places. Our church as a whole. They all form little schools where over time we learn again and again, and often with pain and often with effort, but often with joy at the end, the truth that Jesus talks about in today's gospel, that we are all siblings, we are all children of the same God. We are all called to be humble, which means to be not above other people, not below other people, but to be the people in our smallness that God is calling us to be and be more fully.